Welcome back, friends, philosophers, and fellow authors, to this Wild Isle writing cast. I have back with me Nathaniel Cumberledge. How are you doing today, Nate?
Excellent, excellent.
Yeah, we're
How
here
how
to
is every so
Everything's fine with me. We're here today to talk about originality. In this episode, I've titled Our Novels, Novel. We'll probably be venturing beyond just novels into short stories and other forms of fiction. But really, we're comparing the difference between originality, inspiration, homage, and derivation, particularly disgusting, low, incestuous derivation, as Nathan has coined there, at least coined as far as I'm concerned. But before we begin, if you want to take part in this podcast, if you know me or know of me or know someone who knows me, some way to get in contact with me, either various social media or my website, wildislet.com, you can. We have a number of topics still open to discuss, though they are dropping like flies. Also, if you would like to suggest a topic, even if I have no idea who you are, you're perfectly welcome to, and I'll definitely consider it. What we have left over, we have a conversation on theme, delving into the depths. We have a conversation left on setting and world building. That's the author spake upon the face of the waters. We have a conversation on style and objectively or not objectively quality prose. That's narrative voice, potense or pretense. Regression to the mean is a conversation about rules and when they apply and when they don't, when they'll help and when they'll hurt. Uh, Art versus escapism. So that's narratives as nourishment or decadence. It's exactly what it sounds like. Still open is when is the weeb always wrong? Discussing how, let's say, literary devices, or not even literary, just devices used in anime and manga can hurt the new writer who is not well read but watches way too much anime like I did growing up. The nature of villainy, what makes a villain, and why do people choose evil, and one more that I've recently added. So reader rights versus justified writing. When is the author or reader in the wrong? This is a topic not super close, but fairly close to my heart. I've seen it quite a lot where readers misread something and then accuse the author of bad writing, and then the author points to the paragraph where the thing is that the writer or the reader said wasn't there. You can tell I've had this happen to me before, can't you? All right, so those are the topics up for discussion. If you want to participate, get a hold of me. Again, at my website is a good place to do so, wildislet.com/contact, I believe is where my contact form is. While you're there, check out my novel, Wand Smoke Broken, a weird fantasy story. Reads a bit like a Western, lots of psychedelic mushrooms and terrible undead creatures and mushroom men and all kind of other weird things. And also, if you're an author and you're looking for an editor, I do editing, particularly through my Wild Isle Style Guide, where I focus on stylistic choices, helping you sharpen your manuscript, polishing it, making your prose into something beautiful, taking in influences, both contemporary but particularly older and antiquated, and revitalizing them for the modern day. Um, and Nate, you said you don't have anything to shill, is that right?
nope.
All right. Well, we're done shilling for right now. So now we're going to talk about originality. And immediately when I think of originality, I think of the question, two questions really. Is any, in terms of literature, any work of fiction original? But then that begs the question, what is originality? So you can tackle or throw either of those questions or both. Is anything original, and what even is originality when we're talking about fiction?
I will say that I believe originality is possible. However, originality in the strictest sense that people think of it is often it's a situation in which the juice is not worth the squeeze situation, because the quote "there is nothing new under the sun" is probably true, in which everything you can imagine has been conveyed in some way, except maybe some elements of like quantum physics or whatever, which is outside of the scope of most people's fiction writing. So I think the important thing, my take is mainly going to be the important thing about originality is to have a breadth of influences and knowledge of tropes, so or whatever, so that you can, or I know tropes is a bad word, but it's the closest thing I can get to right now, but having a massive like catalog of that stuff you're aware of so that you can combine them in new and innovative ways that people didn't expect before, right?
Yeah, so that's like an originality of composition or composite as opposed to originality of essence. Am I understanding that right?
Yes, because at a fundamental level, there's just every kind of thing like that, originality of essence, has appeared before for the most part. There might be something that has not that I am unaware of, but I guess that's why I'm unaware of it. If you can think of it, you should put it in a book, and then it won't be original for other people anymore.
Yeah, actually, as you're saying that, I even had this thought. There very well may be no essence to even the concept of originality of essence. So tell me what you think of this. The very idea that a thing is original is contingent upon the subjectivity of the person experiencing it, right? So originality is in reference to that person, and so you can't actually be original with any consistency. In fact, you know, you might be original in one moment, the next moment you're not, and maybe you were entirely trite. That you went to a new place or with a new audience who's never seen what you've done before, and then now suddenly you're original until you show it to them, and then you're not again. There doesn't really seem to be anything at the bottom of, let's say, pure originality at the level of, let's say, the conceit in and of itself in regard to fiction.
All right. Yeah, this reminds me of something I talk about with my other friends a lot. The idea, I've referred to this as boss baby syndrome, which is named after a film because there is a meme in which this hypothetical being has only ever seen the film Boss Baby, and upon seeing his second movie, will say, "Man, I'm getting a lot of Boss Baby vibes from this." Because like he has nothing else to compare it to. The other thing is like he'll see patterns of comparison of the only things he knows in the new thing, no matter how dissimilar that thing is, right?
Yeah, but that's really interesting because of how much people desire originality. Um, Given that there is nothing, if in fact there is really, really nothing quite at the bottom of it, why do you think everyone wants their work so badly to be original? Especially because if what we're saying is true, the works that the, let's say, author who wants to be original likes and perhaps might be inspired by or has enjoyed probably also wouldn't have been original in the way that they're seeking after. So why are people, you know, constantly, you know, chasing this I don't know what to call it,
I
but
believe that I believe that the main reason we chase originality is to stand out for the most part from the pack, not to not be accused of being trite and tropey and stuff. But the reality is, most of the time, somebody's going to be able to look at your thing and point out how similar you are to another thing. Because at this point, we also reached like peak pop culture saturation like several decades ago, which is why it doesn't feel like there is anything quote unquote original coming out. But there's also no effort, like no like mainstream effort. There are certainly like individual efforts, but there's no mainstream effort to try to innovate on older things, I guess. And that's something I'll get into in a little bit. But I think mainly the desire to be original is to make something that you think is yours and also to stand out, because standing out is of course going to get more eyes on a thing most of the time. But the reality is stuff that is like hyper original can often be very weird and very niche, and that can lead you into obscurity.
yeah, where the potential audience isn't really there. This reminds me a little bit of, you know, being in high school and trying to, you know, find my identity, man, and stand out from the crowd. And I finally found the word I was looking for. It was unicorn. Like everyone's trying to chase their, unique, special unicorn, not realizing that we have, let's say, perhaps already gathered all of the unicorns and they're now all like in the zoo, and then we just keep taking a few of them out of the zoo and presenting them to everybody over and over again, and then some people try to, I don't know, genetically engineer uh, a unique unicorn, and it ends up sometimes just being some freak thing with none of the qualities of the unicorn, and no one really wants to look at it. uh,
Yeah, a genre particularly guilty of that tends to be like a really in-depth, well thought out science fiction. Like somebody can be like really intelligent about a concept and try to present it in a very unique way, but it often comes out very difficult to read and very difficult to navigate and difficult to tell a story about. Like say somebody trying to make like a realistic portrayal of all these different alien species communally living together or something, and like it becomes more and more difficult for like humans to relate to the experience of you trying to think of how all of these alternate organisms think and act, and like that's interesting, but it's very niche.
yeah, on minds.com, at Eternus. I usually just refer to him as Captain. He posts questions every day. It was a couple weeks ago now, maybe even more than a month. He asked a question about writing non-human characters. And essentially, I encountered what you just described there. This is delving a little bit into character, but it's related to originality. And he pointed, or I pointed out in my answer to the question, and other people also agreed, said much the same thing, that when you're writing a non-human character, typically you end up making them quite human. Because if you don't, then the reader is very unlikely to be able to sympathize, relate to, or care about that character as they become increasingly non-human. And that kind of relates to our biology, right? Like, why is it that we love like puppies and kittens? As well, they look like human babies, basically. Like they have similar features. And we don't feel the same way about, like, I don't know, baby cockroaches, you know,
Yeah.
because they don't. They have not evolved to appeal to our or been bred, if but more evolved, because it would be, you take a baby wolf or a baby lion cub, and they're still quite cute, to appeal to our sense of relatability.
Yeah.
So,
That is. Oh, continue.
no, I was just gonna to press onward. Do you have anything more you want to say on that?
Not this specific topic.
Okay, so we talked about originality. We've kind of parsed out that originality, insofar as it's useful, comes from composition, which means that if we're not being original in essence, we're taking things that we are borrowing or stealing, if you want to use that word. Though I like to say borrowing. I don't really feel like I own any individual ideas that I have, but we're composing them together to make something that is, if not original, perhaps the word I would reach to is relevant to our current audience. And that's what I would say, if you're taking inspiration as opposed to originality, is that composition. Now, my point of relevance, does that relate to you, or does that seem right to you, that we're not making something original, we're making something relevant to our target audience?
That could be argued. I think that sometimes the audience doesn't know what they're gonna like until they find the thing. Sometimes, but for the most part, they have to be motivated in some way to look for the thing, right? So, like as a general thing, this is one of the reasons why we write in genres, right? And I think you've had an episode about why those can be bad or good in certain circumstances, but that's also why we do it. It's like somebody sets out, they want some kind of adventure story with swords or spaceships or whatever have you they feel like doing that day, and they're gonna look and find something that's easily categorized as such, right?
Yeah, I've actually developed my thinking more on this after having quite a long debate with the captain, and before that, and I want to tie that to that proposition I just made with relevance. So, when I say that when we are taking a work that is inspired from numerous other works and composed in a way that's relevant to the reader, what I mean by relevant is that isn't merely that it is something they're looking for, but it is something that whether or not they're looking for it, when they encounter it, it let's say has the uh, I don't want to use the word intended. It has a function. I like to go to function because it takes away the subjectivity of it on the reader. And relating that to, let's say, the idea of genre. Now, at this point, I've come to the conclusion that genre actually ought not need or it should not be destroyed, though I do think it should be restrained. I think that the loose use of the word has been unhelpful at essentially marketing, which is, is more than merely the means by which the author makes money. It's also how we parse through, particularly in modern day, the endless flood of work that is published and find that which both suits the reader and is also of decent quality, because you just have to sift and sift and sift. Now, not to ramble on too long, but in the case of genre, I've now argued that really, if genre is useful as a term, meaning that you don't have to hyper qualify it to, like a whole paragraph just to describe uh, what genre what your book falls into, which that is actually the state right now. You know that because if you say, well, my genre is science fiction, and that actually doesn't tell the reader damn well anything other than potentially the setting and maybe the theme, depending on what you mean by genre. You see what I mean? Like you just get into this
Yeah.
whole. It's so vague, it's meaningless to most people. And so I'm arguing that it should be tied back to what Aristotle pointed out, which is the telos, which is the function that it has on the person's, let's say, emotional and biological responses. Now, there is going to be some play there. It's not going to affect everything, isn't going to affect everyone the same way. However, just like with medicine, I think there are, let's say, general biological responses to particular, let's say, either characters and character arcs or particular plot types and particular twists and events that will get a rather consistent response. And then if you combine genre with, like we talked about, I called them structures in our conversation, but I actually think plot types is a more accurate way of talking about it. Um, and so you've got different types of plot types. That could be like an adventure story, that could be a mystery. You've got different forms of character arc put in different settings, combined with the emotional effect, let's say, of those other elements, could create something like the relevant, let's say, as opposed to original work, to tie that all. I know I went on a long trip there, but the argument essentially would be that the combination of those different elements, um, those are your inspirations that you tie together in order to have a particular, let's say, make the work particularly useful and or meaningful and or relevant and or interesting. Some that at this point it's getting a little bit gray and vague, but to the reader. um, that was quite a lot. I don't know if you have anything to say about all of that.
It does feed into something that I definitely wanted to talk about today, which is whenever it comes to genre and influences and such, I think the average person has way too narrow of a view of what a genre is to some extent, I guess. The average person, anyway. So, like, whenever you say something like fantasy as a genre, it usually conjures a very specific image of something Tolkien-esque, and then everything else branches off of that, right? That's a very common experience because he in the 1970s he took over the publishing world more or less, and people just publishers wanted to continue emulating that success rather than branching out or doing anything else, right? But one thing I definitely one thing I wanted to touch upon is that whenever you are writing in anything, any genre or any piece, I believe in breadth of influence. So, like, taking elements, inspiration, and things from loads of things. And the best way to do this is, of course, is to and explore things you didn't think you would be into before. That's a big thing. And just finding lots of stuff that other people don't know about. And one thing that I'm going to suggest is, if you are familiar with Dungeons and Dragons and you like fantasy, the original Dungeons and Dragons Dungeon Master's Guide from AD&D has in the back a reading list called Appendix N, created by Gary Gygax, that he said is every book that they had read that inspired the making of the game. In this is a lot of lost, hidden treasures of fantasy and science fiction that, if you have the time to look through, you can just pick any 5 books from that list that you have never heard of, and you will already have a lot of strange influences that are lost and atypical to the modern reader of genre fiction today. And if you, and one suggestion I will make, if you don't think you have time to read this massive list and find the hidden gems, is there's a book by Jeffro Johnson on Amazon about this topic, called Appendix N, The Literary Roots of Dungeons and Dragons, or some such. I don't know the exact undertitle, but you can look for it just by typing in Appendix N. Uh, and he goes through each one point by point. Mostly he talks about it as its influence on the game itself, but you can look at it, say, oh, that's a neat looking story, and then go ahead and read it, sort of thing, just to get a preview of what they're like, because the list itself in the original book doesn't much give you like a synopsis of the writer's work or anything. But that's definitely something that I would suggest to people who like to write fantasy or science fiction. Like, expand your influences, read old weird lists of books.
Yeah, I've started to do that with other books. I did do it with Dungeons and Dragons, but I'll read something and then learn, oh, this person was inspired by these 3 people, and then you read each of those, and then you learn, oh, they were inspired by these 3 people. So, my introduction to Jordan Peterson brought me into Jung, which made me have to go read Nietzsche, and then after reading into Nietzsche, it's like, well, fuck, now I have to go read Goethe, and I should probably read Schopenhauer. And so if you want to, let's say, be able to, I don't want to say write at the level of the people you're reading, though, I will say that if you hope to strive to the quality and inspiration, if not originality, of the people that you yourself enjoy, you should probably try to at least be as broadly and deeply read as they were, plus more, right? Because unless you just want to try and be a copy of them. Uh, that brings into the conversation a question about genre. So, um, in genre in relation to, or let's say, I want to call it inspiration for now. And you mentioned breadth being really important. And I actually think what you're touching on there is what I would argue the uh, misconception of genre. So, like, one of the things I picked up in my conversation with Captain, for those of you who are familiar with him, was that there is a thing that I ended up calling spirit, that kind of takes a placeholder of what most people think of when they think of genre. And most of the time, what people are thinking of is a specific combination of other literary elements that form a kind of narrative that has an identifiable quality. Now, you mentioned Tolkien, right? So Tolkien has definitely influenced lots of high fantasy, and to the point where you can look at, I would argue, I can't say it's most, because I'm not that well read, and there's so much coming out, but um, you can see a Tolkien inspired work and notice what it is with like the snap of your fingers. Like, the setting will tell you, the plot type will tell you almost immediately, because it'll be this, epic, grand, sweeping, um, kind of adventure. It will have very, let's say, archetypal characters. Um, it will, let's say, what would if I bring the genre back to Telos, what it does to the reader? It has a kind of combination of, let's say, I need a better word for it because I take the idea of comedy just in its most general form. It's like a kind of uh, positive elation of emotions, potentially some emotions related to the sublime. So that's that feel of grandeur and wonder and simultaneous awe and fear at the grandness of the narrative combined with the kind of thriller excitement that might come from like a I don't know a larger battle set piece, something like that. Um, Now, I'm actually I'll admit this on air. I've actually never read any of Tolkien's works. I've never seen any. No, that's not true. I've seen the first of the three-part Hobbit films, but I've never seen the Lord of the Ring films. Um, because of this originality problem, and we could probably go somewhere interesting off of this. So when I was in middle school, I started playing the Elder Scrolls games, and that has a lot of modern high fantasy Tolkien-esque elements to it, but it does twist them in enough interesting ways that when I came to other works of fantasy, in comparison to something as not terribly original and not terribly inspired as the Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind, the others felt generic by comparison, including Tolkien's work itself, which is the arguably most of the source material. So, um, what do you think is going on there, or have you seen something similar? Do you have experiences like that?
I will say, in regards to Elder Scrolls is very Tolkien esque, but it also borrows heavily from a tabletop role playing game called RuneQuest. If you want to delve into the deep lore, that is RuneQuest. RuneQuest was a obscure setting created originally for a tabletop war game by a guy who was trying to date Wiccan girls, but he ended up creating a very rich and complicated fantasy world where magic is super common and there's just a whole breadth of weird atypical life forms, and it was a heavy influence on the development of Elder Scrolls' lore going forward after a certain point. And you can kind of see that heavily in both Daggerfall and Morrowind, more so than the later games. But I wanted to add in there. Um, so like everything, no matter how original you think it is, that's what a part of the point I wanted to make is that almost everything draws from something. Uh, Elder Scrolls drew from Tolkien and RuneQuest. Tolkien drew from ancient mythology and specifically like his Anglo-Saxon research. RuneQuest drew heavily from mythology from atypical sources, such as the Vedic stuff and Native American stuff.
Yeah, I know with Tolkien, I had opened up a copy of the Icelandic Eddas. I think it was Icelandic Eddas, as opposed to just general like the Nordic mythology. And the names of the dwarves out of The Hobbit are listed. They might even be in the same damn order that he presents them in, like literally lifted from one to the other. Like because I remember I read their name Oakenshield. I was like, where the fuck have I heard that before? And then I looked and I double checked, and the motherfucker, you stole that. Um, which I mean, to be fair, stealing might not be the right word. The context is entirely different, even if they are the same, arguably the same characters, plot from one universe into another. Uh, that brings about a question that I think is going to get into this incestuous derivation question: is when is you would say taking inspiration, when is it done well, or why is it done well, or how is it done well versus how is it done badly? Because I kind of touched on that with Tolkien, where a lot of people taking inspiration from Tolkien's work, uh, they it for me at least, it has almost always falls flat. Is that due to that lack of breadth problem that you pointed out
That is
before? Like,
yeah, that is absolutely a lack of breadth problem. So that's one of the reasons why I why I shill Appendix N so much is the to expand the breadth of fantasy fiction is one of the goals I have in life. So the problem a lot of people have, especially these days, is not only are they not like they're not inspired by a breadth of fantasy fiction, it's an ever trickling smaller amount all the time. So it's like a filter where the stuff that gets popular continues to be popular, and then stuff that is momentarily popular falls by the wayside until you get to the point where, so like you want to talk about most people's inspirations don't come from literature also, they come from secondary sources. So let's say that Tolkien and a handful of other things inspired, say, like I was saying, Dungeons and Dragons. Dungeons and Dragons inspires most video games that are fantasy oriented, and those video games are what most young people play and explore. And in turn, most of their stuff is going to be influenced by an ever shrinking category of influences, when the goal should be to expand your breadth of influences as wide as possible, take from sources that not a lot of people know about as a basis for like how you can expand and change a thing. And that's why you see I know you were going to talk probably more about this in your Weeb episode, but why you see a lot of people who take heavy influences from anime and isekai that take a lot of influences from Western video games and
oh yeah,
MMORPGs, and it's like whenever I coined this term incestuous, well, you added something to it. I originally used a different word, but what was your word for it?
derivation, I believe.
Derivation, yes, incestuous derivation, where you just have the same ideas rubbing up against each other in very similar ways to create similar works endlessly onto infinity, because people forgot about and don't really branch off into things that were left by the wayside. And like these genres, both science fiction, fantasy, but of course I emphasize fantasy because there's just a very big demand for it in mainstream popular culture, even though I like all kind of stuff. But like people tend to like sword and sorcery faffery. That's just the reality I've accepted as somebody who likes to make things. Uh, so people will just keep making things with the same general ideas, but these genres used to be massive and full of breadth. Like there is a huge amount of difference between Lord of the Rings, Conan the Barbarian, and something like Clark Ashton Smith's Zothica, right? These were like things that were popular and on the shelf around the same time, but so massively different in theme, influence, and like the things they had in common were they both had dudes with swords in them going on adventures.
Yeah, and that again relates to, I think, of part of the problem that comes with what people are thinking of in terms of, um, let's say, I don't want to just keep harping on genre, right? But if you think, okay, the fantasy genre needs these all like a series of elements to be the same, then you're only going to derive your inspirations from works that share only those specific elements all in common. And if you do that, that's naturally going to shrink the breadth of your work. Like you're not going to do maybe something that I did where for, let's say, for my Wand Smoke series, uh, reading through the adventures of Huckleberry Finn and the adventures of Tom Sawyer later in life, because unfortunately I didn't read it when I was a kid. But reading through those definitely influenced my telling of the story. The From Cormac McCarthy, Blood Meridian. Also, like that had a huge, huge, huge influence. Thank you, Nathan, for that one. I'm pretty
Absolutely.
sure you're the one who told me to read it, right?
Yes, the more people who read Blood Meridian, just the better, I think. Even though it is hard to read due to both the writing style and the sheer brutality of the story, I think that um the com- it's very comparable to like the other things people like to write, and like the ideas in it are very transplantable. Like the story didn't have to happen in the old west because it is a timeless story about like man's inhumanity to man. And I think that almost everybody who writes stuff in a setting where that could apply should definitely read that book.
Yes, I am in agreement. Though I did take heavily from the like how much I enjoyed the brutal Western setting. Um, and to show my weebery, I also took from things like Trigun, uh, which really influenced me as a kid, and then combine that with, let's say, any little tidbits of folklore that I could pick up, mostly because of what I call well, it's not just their fault. I wanted to bring this up earlier. The poisoning by Wizards of the Coast. Um, I You mentioned D&D being a huge influence, and I think D&D became, I would argue, became more and more generic
Yeah,
as Wizards took over. And I could think of like, okay, well, we've got Wizards, and that reminds me of like Blizzard, and that reminds me of a cartoony version of Tolkien, and then all the derivation that comes.
yeah,
Do you want to say anything? Do we want
yeah,
to
yeah.
slander
There
Wizards
is
here? Or?
a yes. I hate Wizards of the Coast, and its consequences have been a disaster for the fantasy gaming hobby. But yes, absolutely. So the original, like I was saying, the original creators of the game were TSR, which was a smaller company run by Gary Gygax, Dave Arneson and company, and they had that breadth of influence that I was talking about. They read a lot. They had a deep interest in history, fiction, mythology, and all that, and they just combined everything they liked into a thing and tried to sell it as a cohesive product. It was designed to just be a simulator of things they liked, from like medieval warfare, fantasy adventure stories, and how all these bells and whistles. Over time, it thanks to Tracy Hickman and Dragonlance, it just over time became a Tolkien pastiche simulator. And like it started going downhill before Wizards of the Coast took over, but by the time Wizards of the Coast took over, they doubled down on all the things that were going wrong in the '90s. So
Yeah,
yeah,
that
definitely,
I,
definitely falls into the incestuous derivation problem.
I see a lot of that problem even now with other what were coming off of the height of let's say Wizards of the Coast D&D level generic fantasy with two they've got some similarities to them. So I've got A Song of Ice and Fire and The Witcher. Now these are, you'll notice my theme is this is all within like fantasy settings. So if you've got let's say science fiction or other forms of setting where you're more familiar, please throw those in. But for both of those, I know because of the third Witcher game, The Witcher went from being already kind of popular to an explosion of popularity. It even got, I think, a Netflix series, and then obviously a Game of Thrones took A Song of Ice and Fire and blew it up to monumentous proportions. Now, I actually, I don't. I never played any of the Witcher games. I haven't read the novels. I watched a bit of the TV series, but that looked like it was botched in terms of the direction. I don't know about the actual writing. Um,
I would not say that the show. Well, the I would not say the show is an accurate representation of the better parts of that series. So yeah, I'm not a fan of it.
I got the impression it wasn't doing the source material justice. There were just things that it's like that were problems because it looked like bad production. But in terms of like A Song of Ice and Fire or a Game of Thrones, like I do really like that series. I did when I encountered it feel that um, it had a very firm, grounded, almost historical feeling low fantasy setting with the uh to the point where when the higher magic did appear, I got really excited about it. I remember um the first time, I think it was Beric Dondarrion and his duel with the Hound in the books, the first time he lights his sword on fire, um that seems like a very small bit of magic, right? If you really think about it in the grand scheme of things. But I was like pretty shaken by that. Like it took me aback because that just didn't happen in the series. Where like he cut his hand, his sword caught on fire. Oh shit! Like now the gloves are off. I don't know what's going to happen next because real magic has entered the world. It was a similar feeling when I the first time I read Shadows over Innsmouth, and the first huge chunk of the book is really really dry. You've got the protagonist walking around town just looking at the architecture, and then when he's back in his hotel and all of a sudden in his hotel room someone's trying to get in and he's like completely unarmed and has to escape, then all of a sudden like your heart starts to race. um, it was that level of change of emotion. But as much as I liked the low fantasy setting and the dearth of magic and the dark and grittiness, the what we could argue realism of the characters and the politics involved, Song of Ice and Fire definitely sparked. It even affected me with my first novel, a an attempt at trying to make a world as richly and exactly detailed as George R. R. Martin did, in a way that I know hurt my first shame flop of a book, which I will not name here. You can find it; it's not hard to find. Um, but I know it hurt me, and it hurt other people's writing that I've read as well. Particularly, I felt like it gave people license to just be, uh, let's say, uselessly brutal and salacious when it didn't enhance the scene or didn't enhance the writing. And I would say the same, something similar with The Witcher. Now, I can't say as much, but I have seen works that, despite not reading The Witcher, I've read and said, "Oh, this person must like The Witcher," because like this is definitely like any of the protagonists. They carry two swords, okay, and they have like this kind of low key magic, and um, they they're kind of the uh, kind of gruff
Oh,
voice lone
fantasy
hero.
Clint Eastwood.
Yeah.
Fantasy
At
Clint
that
Eastwood.
point,
Yeah.
if I can tell, that's a problem. I kind of ranted on for a while there, but I think that's a pretty good example of this incestuous derivation, where it's very clear there's been one major influence and
Yeah.
then no other influences, as I like to use the term, Frankensteined together into the works.
And to go back to the point of originality, The Witcher is, of course, a pastiche and influence of a combination of Elric of Melniboné, which is a more obscure sword and sorcery hero from the 1970s, who inspired a lot of stuff later on, including Warhammer Fantasy, which Michael Moorcock invented chaos, and Games Workshop stole it from him. Well, not invented chaos, but invented that idea of chaos as a universal force sort of thing. Uh, you think of what, and including like the symbol he drew on a napkin at a bar one time. That's the chaos symbol. He drew that. Also, of course, Tolkien and heavily with the different races and their relations was a heavy influence on The Witcher, and Robert E. Howard's Solomon Kane, which is a historical fiction series about a Puritan adventuring monster hunter, which is also really good. Albeit if you're averse to reading old books with problematic content for the era, like because of the era they are written in, maybe skip Solomon Kane, but you shouldn't let that impede your enjoyment of old literature. Just throwing that out there.
It should enhance your enjoyment. Like if I read Lovecraft, I enjoy his blatant racism. There's something like charming and quaint about it. The same thing with Robert E. Howard. I have the Solomon Kane stories. I have not been able to read them. I've been reading a bunch of indie authors lately and philosophy before that, but I've read through all the Conan stories, and uh, when Conan says something like, I'm not some dog to leave a man of my own race to these. I can't remember what he calls them. There's some like dark tribal jungle people, or maybe they were Picts. Either way, he doesn't count the Picts as white men, and it's really funny because it's so what's the word I'm looking for? Anachronistic to the time in which Conan would ostensibly exist in, to even think of the white man, uh, like as a singular race. That it's just it's funny. You get a
If
very
you if you know about Robert E. Howard, that was kind of part of the joke, though, right? Robert E. Howard was very interested in his ethnicity, and he traces his ethnicity back to Pictish Celts. So the idea of making his like ancestors the savage like monster race, quote unquote, was funny to him because a theme of the work is a theme of his body of work entirely, not just Conan, but it's most accentuated in Conan, is that there is a cycle of civilizations in which sometimes you're on the top of the food chain, sometimes you're the barbarian that's considered subhuman by the dominant culture, and so on and so forth. It's just, you know,
yeah,
all a
the
matter of
Game of
circumstances.
Empires.
Yeah, all a matter of circumstance.
All right, so um, we were just talking about we went through the Song of Ice and Fire, ranted on about that. It talked about the Witcher, and you're talking about some of the influences of that.
Mhm.
Let's say that we ventured from there into a few works, including Solomon Kane, the Puritan monster hunter, which I have read some of Robert E. Howard's little bits of poetry before, some of his stories in there, just like perusing through, and they're very good. Actually, I was surprised. So now we talked about a lot of works that were successful in their own right, right? Like I didn't come and say like The Witcher is bad or A Song of Ice and Fire itself is bad. I didn't say Tolkien's work itself was bad. Um, it's the works that are incestuously derivated from them.
Yeah,
Now we haven't really talked exactly about the process of or the mechanics of being inspired by a sufficient breadth of work, and how that might go into making something, again, if not original, but is at least inspired and relevant to the reader, and pays proper homage to the multitude of sources. We can get into the homage bit a little bit later, but um, yeah, what does it look like specifically, like in the details, when a work is properly inspired in your experience?
that's a good question. I mean, if I'm reading something more recent and I can point to it being like very blatantly just one or like influenced by one or two things, I would say that that's a negative. But at the same time, like it could I think that if something is sufficiently influenced by enough things, it'll just on its own feel fresh, and I won't have the need to point out how I've seen every trope in a different thing because like that's just like natural instinct of like everything is gonna be relatable to something else. But if I point to it and see that this has been this is influenced by enough things, it just I turn that part of my brain off pretty easily. I guess.
Yeah, I think it's in the same way that in life, yeah, you've seen iterations of everything that you experience all the time, but there's so many that your brain does not process them as the same thing, right? You got to think like you see the same spectrum of color and the same general shapes, right? Now with slight deviations, but you see them everywhere all the time. Um, if you're looking at roads, like roads are like the same, but you're not sitting there thinking that like, oh, here's another road just like this other road. You just don't even think about it at all. It's like it
Yeah.
is a
One
road.
comparison I have made before in a conversation with somebody else is those how the Japanese have like genres of women or fantasy girlfriends or whether the what is it tsundere yandere stuff that generally doesn't like exist perfectly formed in reality, right? Because like you can see this person and notice that you encounter some woman in the real world and it's like, oh, she's a composite of all these different elements, so it's impossible that the whole time she is representative of this Japanese archetype or whatever of fantasy girlfriend or whatever.
Yeah.
So, like in
One
real life, people are composite of influences. Therefore, your work should be composite of influence.
Yeah, and I think I'm going to go through some of the influences that led into the novel I've mentioned before, Wand Smoke. Well, that's the series name. The first novel is Broken, but I keep the Wand Smoke because I think it's a catchier title, and just put a colon and then whatever the book title is. So anyway, in that book, one of the things that started it, there's two main influences. One is from the third Harry Potter book, funnily enough. So in the third book, at the beginning, I believe it's been probably more than a decade since I've read it. Sirius Black, there's a news report about him, and it's a Muggle news report, and they can't say that he's got a magic wand, and so they say he's a dangerous, escaped felon with a gun. And this is British newscast, so like that they're pissing themselves when they hear that. Oh no, the bad guy's got a gun. Uh, but the idea, something occurred to me when I read that years and years and years and years ago, and it was like, a gun like would be really effective even against these wizards with their wands. Like, how long does it take you to say Avada Kedavra and kill someone? And you have to be like a high level evil wizard to have the evil desire to actually pull it off. Versus the gun is way faster than Avada Kedavra and probably more effective. You're more likely to hit your target. The bullet travels pretty quick. And I combined that idea with something I had heard many years later from the lips of Matt Easton of Scala Gladiatoria. He is a HEMA instructor and a YouTuber. And I've been watching his content for years. And he had read an account that he then summarized about when revolvers were new. And he described the people of the time who weren't super familiar with them had the impression that revolvers were like death wands, right? They had this idea because early revolvers, they were not as accurate. They misfired quite a lot more often. You were probably shooting with your left hand because you were an officer if you owned one of these things that had a saber in your right hand. Um, and when you think about all of that, like they weren't thinking that, you're going to miss your target, your shot might not go off, et cetera, et cetera. It might not kill the person if you don't hit them. But people had this idea. It was like point, click, dead, right? Like, aha, dead, 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 dead. And I combined the idea of like, okay, a magic wand um, that's actually not a magic wand, but it's a gun. And that's where I got the idea to have a fantasy story that had uh, essentially primitive firearms in it, but that were referred to as magic wands, and they would be death wands because the impression from people is like a point, click, you're dead, right? Um, and then from that, I started to take other inspiration. So um, that was probably part of the start of it. There was a Magic the Gathering card. Here's Wizards of the Coast, right? I think it was called Hissing Miasma. And just the name Miasma and the purple mist on the card made me take that feature. Okay, I'm going to put that in the setting. The idea that there's huge swathes of the land covered in this poisonous, acidic mist. And then my question is like, well, what's in the mist, right? And I thought of a city, and then I looked up in the mythology about the idea of the king under the mountain. That's kind of like Tolkien took the same idea, by the way, with the dwarf king, like digging too deeply under the mountain. One iteration of that, the stories features King Ugir, who is also um, Ugir the Dane, who I believe was mythologically part of, or legendarily, I don't know how proper it is, part of Charlemagne's, let's say, not court, but one of his knights or something.
The
Um,
Paladins of Charlemagne.
yeah. And so I started taking all these little elements and stitching them together until eventually I had this whole thing. Like Conti was originally, so Conti's name comes from fully coolly actually. So Conti, like the robot, but the reason I picked Conti as his name is there's one of the episodes the character's Mamimi is convinced that this robot is a character from her video game, uh, who is Lord of the Black Flame, who basically convinces some arsonist to go and burn down Ennsville, the city of devils. And so I took her misinterpretation and thought, okay, well, what if I made a fantasy character like this? And I actually had a D&D character who was that, who's Conti, Lord of the Black Flame, who was a troglodyte. And then I thought, what if I just, instead of having it be like a D&D troglodyte where everything has to be a fucking beast race, it was just literally like a troglodyte, like in Lovecraft, one of his first two stories. I can't remember if it's his first or second story that was published. Is like some guy goes into a cave and ends up murdering this like albino who'd been living in the cave for forever. Um, and so I took that. I'm not going to keep going on and on and on and on, but I could.
Yeah,
Um, and you see, like,
that's the idea.
yeah, there's no
Right.
end. And you might say, well, that doesn't sound very original, Marquise. Did you come up with like anything on your own? And I would probably say hardly anything, to be perfectly honest. But I have not most of the inspired ideas go entirely unnoticed by my readers. They might catch a couple, and they have caught a couple, um, but probably less than 1% of the inspirations get picked out by a reader. Do you have like a similar experience in things that you've written where you could start doing that, like just
Oh,
listing off?
absolutely. And one thing that you do that is good is don't just take from things that of like you were saying earlier, the genre or box you're trying to write in. Feel free to just take things from everywhere. And the more you do that, the more wide your pool, the more novel your thing is going to see. More novel your novel or whatever is going to seem to people who like say almost only read a handful of types of things, or even just like it's it or even if they read a lot, it's like it's there's no way that somebody is going to have all the influences you do if you're well read and just explore the world around you. It doesn't even have to just be fiction. It's just take inspiration from real life. uh Live an exciting life. That's another thing. Go out, exercise, fight people. Not fight people in the streets, but learn how to fight and learn how to describe the experience of like fighting in a gym or something, and let that influence how you do action or whatever. There's a million different ways that you can expand your voice and your visions and all that good stuff. Nah,
Yeah.
that's it's great.
So I
I
want to hear you
I'm
go
glad you were
through.
able to illustrate that.
Well, I want you to do it too. Like, if you want to, I'd be, very glad to hear you break down, even if it's just a few inspirations, three or four that went into a story that you've written or a setting. I know you do a lot of writing for tabletops.
Yeah, I do a lot of tabletop. So, like, the core influences that I generally pull from are, of course, the Weird Tales trio. As far as fiction, I like the works of H.P. Lovecraft, Robert E. Howard, and Clark Aston Smith as like my foundational guys that I like to like pull from. But they, of course, in turn, I like to be influenced by the things that influence them. I like ancient history with particular attention to the Bronze Age and early Iron Age because these time periods were essentially different worlds. Uh, it's fascinating to view how like they handled religion, how they viewed the world. Ancient peoples walked through the world with a sense of magic to it that was lost as we secularized in ways that even people in the 1400s probably couldn't have related to the people of like 500 BC. So like they one thing you can look at things like the job of augur, right? Or a person who could like predicted the future based on the flights of birds. Like who comes up with a job title like that? Somebody who saw significance in everything. So like people like have always been pattern recognizing creatures and so could just see things in the world and thought that they all had a purpose because of our cause and effect mindset. But sometimes they just like they were also self-centered in the sense that they like all of this like all of what I'm perceiving must be a message to me in some way from the gods, and I just don't understand them. And it's my job to piece together these disparate things to understand the world. And so that's also an influence, just the way that people like lived in a state of perpetual, which what we would call religious delirium, I guess, or a religious intoxication. And I think that's fascinating. So I'm also inspired by philosophy and political writers of certain time periods. Obviously, we both have a interest in Nietzsche. Um, I also like the works of Oswald Spengler, particularly both Decline of the West and Men and Technics, to analyze how civilizations develop and decline. I find that topic very interesting. This was a topic that I explored before delving into the works of R.E. Howard or Robert Howard, who also like wrote mainly like a big theme of his is rise and decline of civilization. Let me think of what else off the top of my head. I'm fascinated by historical accounts of people in wars. I very much like military history, especially first-hand accounts are very interesting to me, both modern and ancient. Stuff like Xenophon's Anabasis, I think is how it's pronounced, which is an insanely interesting story about a Greek mercenary who goes to fight for one of the Persian princes during a war of secession. And they lose, so they have to find their own way home with no support and no pay.
Oh wait, is
It's
this
just,
the story that is the basis for the novel and then eventual movie, The Warriors?
I think
I'm
so,
pretty sure.
yes.
Yeah, because that. Oh my God! Like you want to talk about taking inspiration and then making it something that was like, oh man, that novel, the novel is pretty brutal. I actually prefer the film because it's a little bit more upbeat. In the same way, I kind of prefer the kick-ass films to the kick-ass comic books, even though I enjoyed both. But yeah, if you want to see an example of like, okay, let's take this Greek narrative and then okay, let's now make it gangs in New York City, but let's make it particularly like 1950s, teenage fighting gangs, and let's put them all in fucking costumes, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely an illustration. Just like you can find inspiration from anywhere for anything. But yeah, I mean,
yeah,
I could go on also. I've got so much stuff that I just like and heavily influences the direction of things I want to create, I guess. It's like and the more I discover things that are new from differing sources, the more interested I get in exploring that. So like I talk a lot about how the D&D reading list is really good, and now I'm starting to also look into the Traveler reading list, which is was one of the earliest science fiction role playing games, which also has a huge breadth of weird like space adventure stuff. And one in particular that I'm looking into now is called, I think it's called Flandry, which is like the dude took James Bond and reimagined James Bond as working for a space empire. So if you're one of those people that doesn't like that Disney Star Wars never does anything with like imperial characters besides make them like evil cartoon caricatures, look into Flandry. I think that's what it's called. But
all
yeah,
right.
just
Flandry.
all kind
So
of
the one thing we haven't touched on yet is the idea of paying homage to your inspirations. Do you ever make like the direct reference or directly tie it in? An example of which I'm going to use from the Warriors. So I think both in the movie and in the novel, one of the characters has a comic book that is a comic of the Xenophons. I can't remember the name of it. You said it before.
on a basis, I think. I
Yeah,
don't
on
I
a
don't know
basis,
if I'm
that's right.
pronouncing it right. I'm not a Greek
Yeah.
student, so
But that one of the characters has a comic of that with him through the story. And that was a way of paying homage to say this is the same story. In fact, with the movie, I'm pretty sure there's a narrator who announces like this story is this other story, but with these gangs of in New York. So do you ever pay homage in your own works, or if not, or if you can't think of a quick example, are there any other like homages that you feel are effective or are particularly ineffective that you want to forewarn against?
I think that homage and such is actually really important because I subscribe to the idea of, I don't know if you've heard this concept before, but you probably have, literature as conversation. So like the bodies, the like all fiction or like all literature in general is one long conversation with itself or each other, and we're all developing towards different goals, obviously. But like whenever you talk about homage and influence and stuff, like we influence each other so much just as if we're bouncing off each other in one long conversation with this genealogy of ideas. And I think not, and whenever I talk about influence being the key to creativity and like there isn't really true originality or whatever, all that stuff, it's not only acceptable to have influences and stuff, and but it should be mandatory that you like acknowledge where you came from to some extent. So I think like maybe not super blatant references, but one example of this, say in Game of Thrones, which you reference, like I have not watched Game of Thrones, but I am aware of this. There is a scene in which one character is like asking people to name his sword or whatever, or name some kind of sword that was forged for him. And one of the characters says Stormbringer, which is a reference to the fact that George R.R. Martin was heavily influenced by Michael Moorcock's Elric of Melniboné, in which his sword is a magic sword called Stormbringer. So, like,
I I
every,
did not know that.
yes. So that's just one example of how like you can do that. You can pay homage to stuff very tastefully. Like it's not like you have to blatantly be like call out something super recognizable. But like most people aren't going to notice that. That probably went over like 90% of people's heads. But somebody showed me that scene after I had was talking to them about that book series, and they're like, "Oh, so like wait, I've heard that before. It's from this scene." I'm like, yeah, that's a reference to that. And then I look into it, and surely enough, George R.R. Martin was a fan of Michael Moorcock.
Yeah,
So like,
I've tried to implement. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Nate.
so yeah, it's like it's not something like people feel like they. Some people are ashamed of the fact that they think they take so much influence from other things. But the reality is, everybody does. Even the most successful and creative people that you make things you love pulled stuff from other people, and even acknowledge as much in their own stuff sometimes. And I think that's good to do, actually.
Yeah, tell me if you think this is a valid example, and we'll wrap things up. So, in one of my pieces that'll be coming out in the next few months, if all things go well, my next manuscript is almost done being proofed. So now I just need to get cover art and then promote and release. One of the stories that I've now titled "The King." It's there's like an inner city um, degenerate, fighting gangster. So here's some influences from the Mouse Utopia experiment, plus the Warriors, plus the Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. So somewhere near the beginning of the Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, Finn says something like, "But I don't." This is about Moses. He's like, "But then I can't remember what he says. He basically discards everything that he started learning about Moses because he learned Moses is dead. He said, I don't put no stock in dead people." Um, and essentially I took that same notion and had the narrator Leroy, um, who is not actually a reference to the World of Warcraft Leroy, even though that is very very common. Mostly I took that name because it means the king or like the royal, and he goes by the moniker like Leroy the King. So it's someone who doesn't know that he's calling himself the king, the king. Um, and and he says something like, here in the city we don't put no stock in dead people. Um, and the character voice isn't the character voice of Mark Twain, but the line is Mark Twain, and I hope that people kind of recognize that influence because I had read Huckleberry Finn, um, not shortly before, but before writing that story, and part of that, I you know, uh, part of his voice did come through a little bit there. Um, but yeah, I don't know if that counts. That one line stolen
No, that's
from how.
yeah, no, that's excellent. I think stuff like that. I think they call that illusions in professional, like big brain writing circles.
It's a little, it's underneath an illusion. Like, typically an illusion, I have to actually mention what it is. Like if you read Paradise Lost, like there's
Mhm.
an illusion every couple freaking lines. It's like a biblical illusion or a mythological illusion where it, by name, one of the like a biblical landmark or a mythological figure or story will get directly referenced in the form of either a metaphor or a simile. So uh, it's not quite an illusion, but yeah, I guess that counts as paying homage for anyone who happens to catch that. All right. Well, we're at the end of our hour, Nate. This was I think quite a productive conversation. Um, we now know that novels are not novel. That originality is not the name of the game. We want to be inspired. We don't want to be incestuously derivative, and so in order to avoid that, we must Frankenstein our works from the broadest possible range that we can manage. And then it's also good to pay homage when you can to the works that inspired you. Did I miss anything there?
No, that sounds excellent.
All
Read a
right.
lot of
Now,
stuff.
yeah, stuff that you don't like too. I think because one, you'll find that you might like it after you've made yourself read it. Two, maybe you suck as this is kind of controversial. I'll go with my last topic on the list, which I'm not going to go through the list again, but it was about readers being wrong. Sometimes you suck as a reader, and that's why you don't enjoy what you're reading. And I'm not kidding. When I very first started reading Lovecraft, my reading ability was really bad, and I had a hard time getting through his long sentences, and it made it a little bit just unpleasurable. But I had a essentially my kung fu teacher growing up was more like Pai Mei and less like the kind and gentle like Buddhist monk, and so I just forced myself to do it until I could do it well, and then I enjoyed it like a lot more. So read a wide range, read things that are hard to read, because if you don't, then you're going to end up producing a book that's the equivalent of having a baby with your sister, and that's gross. Don't do that. All right.
Is
Uh,
that life
I'm gonna
advice?
yeah. So let's go ahead and chill at the end. If you made it this far, thank you so much. You can keep up with me by going to my website, wildislelit.com. I've got all the podcasts hosted there as well as on YouTube. And eventually I'll put them up somewhere else when I have the time and I'm not stressed in, day out, trying to keep up on my work schedule. Also, there on my website, you can see my published works. Right now, I've got out Wand Smoke, Broken, which we've talked quite a bit about today, and my editing service, the Wild Isle Style Guide. If you want to be let's say if you want your manuscript to be just as inspired with a wide range of styles, like all the different types of works we talked about here today on our podcast, go check that out. Hire me as your editor, and I will help you help yourself, particularly the Wild Isle Discipleship, where I will provide to you a reading list and study guide, which is essentially what I learned going through grad school. So instead of you paying $100,000 to be in debt to learn what I learned, you could pay much less than that and have a lot more fun doing it. And if you want to be on this podcast, try and get in contact with me. You can do that at my wife's website as well, wildislet.com/contact, or through any of the social media that you can find me on. I think I'm on all the mainstream ones and a few of the alternatives, particularly minds.com. And thank you again, Nate, for joining me today. This was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed this conversation. I hope you did as well.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, for all of you listening, I'm sure Nate will be back on eventually. But until then, we'll see you next time.